Huron.
Well, just give me a couple minutes. I don't think I do this.
It's rolling.
Oh, okay. First of all, thank Mary Sutherland. Who, oh, okay, well, go right ahead.
Okay, everybody, welcome to our afternoon seminar with Frank Joseph. A lot of people don't realize how many UFO sightings that there actually is in Wisconsin. You know, everybody looks to the southwest, or Brazil, every place else but Wisconsin. Well, there's a lot of UFO sightings right here. And today, Frank Joseph is going to be talking about these UFO sightings in Wisconsin. So we want to introduce you right now, Frank Joseph, a longtime friend, researcher. And we're looking forward again to going out to Rock Lake. This is a lot of towards South
Next May.
Yeah. Can I just take a moment? When Frank and I went to Rock Lake, a representative of the DNR came on. A lot of people think that Rock Lake, they'll hear about maybe 2 or 3 pyramids underwater. Well, when that representative of the DNR came on, he showed us a map, and he talked to us and told us that the DNR has actually mapped out over 1,100 structures underneath that water. It is a complete underwater city from one end, north, south, east, west. So anyhow, Frank and I are making plans to go back out there again. And if he wants to tell you what we found, that's up to him. Otherwise, I'll just kind of keep it to ourselves. Or maybe you can talk to him too.
Well, thank you, Mary. Mary Sutherland, she's a really great lady, and I'm not just saying that to be patronizing. She has a wonderful facility for connecting people, and the wonderful presenters that have given us their talks today, I think, are proof of her ability to really network people. That's so important. And I'm very grateful and humbled to be in the same class of these wonderful presenters. Just a little thing on the side about Rock Lake. This is not what I'm going to talk about. For those of you that have heard my presentations in the past, I mostly talk about American prehistory. That has been the focus of my life for the last several decades. And so talking about UFOs, I feel a little bit out of my element, except that I've had some personal experiences that have brought this particular question to my attention. As far as Rock Lake is concerned, it's a small body of water between Milwaukee and Madison in southern Wisconsin, right off of the I-94 expressway. It's about 3 miles long from north to south and about 1 3/4 miles wide from east to west. What's remarkable about this lake is that from very early pioneer times, the local Indians at that time, they were the Menominee Indians, the Ho-Chunk, and the Winnebago. And they talked about a city of the dead at the bottom of this lake, this little lake, which was later called Rock Lake. And it was around the turn only of the 20th century, literally 1901, where some of these structures were seen for the very first time during a period of prolonged drought. Since then, until the present time, divers and boaters have occasionally glimpsed buildings at the bottom of this lake, which is very turbid, like most of these Midwestern lakes that are surrounded by farmlands, where there's a lot of agricultural runoff. The visibility is very, very poor. And these expeditions, as it were, some professional, some amateur, to locate this city of the dead that the Native Americans talked about, have been largely unsuccessful. There have been some periods of success, some photographs taken, rather equivocal but intriguing. And it was only last June 22nd that Mary Sutherland and some wonderful divers, professional divers, and myself, we went along to see if we could use a new piece of equipment in Rock Lake for the first time, and this was an infrared camera, an infrared underwater camera. And we dragged it over the lake, didn't see anything of interest, although we did see that the infrared camera worked very beautifully. It revealed the contours of the bottom of the lake, showed hills and valleys, showed it quite clear, even though the visibility itself to the naked eye was very poor. Diving visibility there was no more than about 2 or 3 feet, so we couldn't really expect to see anything. But after a day of no success whatsoever, towards the end of our time on the lake in the afternoon, the skipper of our boat said, "Well, is there any place of the lake you'd like to go that we haven't seen so far, or there's a chance we might find something?" So I said, "Well, let's go to the southeast quadrant of the lake. There's a report of something that was found there years ago, but nothing very much. Divers normally go in that area of the lake. It's rather shallow, and nothing's been found there of significance." So we cruised there anyway because we had lack of anything else to do. And of course, that's always the way it works out. When you least expect it, that's when things show up. And we cruised along an underwater stream bed. When the lake was, of course, the water level was much lower. There were streams that came in from offshore, and they left their mark. And so there was a stream bed that's maybe about 25 feet below the surface, not very deep. So I said, well, supposedly something was found on this stream bed 15 years ago or more. Let's drag our camera along here and maybe we'll see something. I had no hopes for success at all. And luckily at that time, there were 4 of us, not just myself, not just one person, but there were 4 of us, including Mary, who were watching the camera. And it was interesting to see. There we found the stream bed and the camera's showing it quite well. And lo and behold, on the southern shore of this stream bed, which I'd say was maybe, it's hard to guess exactly, maybe it was 10 feet wide and a depression of about maybe 5 feet. And on the southern shore loomed the most perfect building that I have ever seen that any of us have ever seen underwater, 25 feet underwater. It looked in the camera like it had been made of perfectly fitted black onyx stone. And as Mary and the others, and her husband as my witness, what I'm telling you is exactly what we saw. You have to understand, first of all, that the bottom of Rock Lake is incredibly muddy, very deep mud. And on top of that is a very thick layer of silt. It's a very difficult lake to dive in for that reason, because if your fins hit that silt, it creates great billows of obscuring material. You can't see nothing then. So the camera, of course, didn't stir up anything. I mean, you could see somewhat through the silt, but not all through the mud. And rising up out of the silt and out of the mud, I don't have any way to draw this, so I have to describe it as best I can. A very steep-sided pyramid, not like the pyramid that you see in Egypt. Very steep-sided. It looked as though it rose about maybe 4 feet above the silt. And it came not to a point or an apex, but to a flat top. Everything was beautifully made. You could see the stonework fitted together. These were not piles of rock. This was not some glacial remnant. It had very sharp sides. And the camera, it was funny, it showed the whole thing, and the boat kept drifting, and the camera banged right into the structure itself and went away from it, and we lost sight of it, and then the camera turned around and came back, and we saw it a second time from a different point of view. And we don't know how long it is. It looks like an elongated tent. One side is very pyramidal, black stone blocks, and this was the amazing thing of it. On the front of it, there were glyphs. The one that I remember, I focused on, we were screaming, we were watching, we just couldn't believe what we're seeing. The one that I remember most distinctly was like an S on its side with curlicues at the end. Now, there was writing below. I didn't look at that too much. I just focused on that S. I'm looking at the structure itself. I mean, we eyeballed this thing for quite a few minutes, for like, maybe went on not quite 10 minutes. The boat was drifting. We didn't even have the motor on. We were just slowly drifting because the cable would have stirred up material otherwise. And so Brad and others, they did see what looked like some kind of writing at the bottom. Now this structure, even though it's only appeared to be about 4 feet high, you have to remember this is the top, the apex of this. It was lost in the silt. I have no idea how far that silt goes down. It goes down far. I have no idea how far the mud goes down. I know that goes down very far also, because in the past we've tried steel rods as probes to see how far down. In some areas it just goes all the way down, like 10 feet of mud. So I don't know how big this structure is. I hesitate talking about it because I have no proof except for our eyewitnesses. Everybody on the boat eventually saw it, except the guy that brought along the camera. That's all we had. By the time he got over, we had missed it, and we tried to go back. Well, everybody eventually saw it, so I guess about 5 or 6 of us saw it. And amongst us was this professional diver. He freaked out. So we threw on our equipment as fast as we could, our dive masks and everything else. The boat is drifting. We threw out our anchor lines anyway. We knew exactly where that thing was. We had our cameras, everything else. We went over the side. The visibility was like the worst I have ever seen it. I mean, it was just about this far. We could not find that structure. I mean, I don't care how close you are on top of it. You've got to have more than about 2 feet visibility to find anything. So we swam around the boat. We used up all our air trying to find it. Could not find it at all. So I have not written anything about it at all. This is the first time I've made any kind of public statement about it. I do it only this because Mary asked me to. So we figured, oh, okay, we're at the end of our air and everything else. We took really good visual coordinates on where this structure is. I know exactly, pretty much exactly where it is. It's right on that stream bed, right offshore on the southeast quadrant. So we waited all through September and October for the weather to clear, and as you know, it never did. We had lots of rain, lots of wind. If you get lots of wind and rain together, that totally shoots visibility. We need a period of dry calm. Just about 4 or 5 days of dry calm. We had nothing like that in September or October. So it's too late in the year now, and we knocked it over until next May. Why wait that long? Why not go out in the wintertime? Because the lake changes over. Whenever it changes over, what I mean by that is the warmer or colder temperature on the top hits the warmer or colder temperature depending on the season. And when that happens, it flips over all this debris that's in the water, clears it out temporarily, and you've got really great visibility. I was there a couple of times, luckily enough, but I could see, believe it or not, I could see clear across the lake. I could see hundreds of feet. It was an incredibly disorienting experience because I've been diving in Rock Lake since 1987. I've had over 100 dives in that lake, and most of the dives, your visibility is like 10 or 12 feet. You're lucky you get any more than that. And this one day I was there for the changeover. It just happened to be in the water, and I could see clear across the lake. The lake was clearer than in the Bahamas. It was amazing. I was in the wrong place to see any pyramids, though. I saw nothing. But I saw the contours of the lake. It was a very dramatic experience. So we've got to get down there in May after the major inversion has taken place from winter to spring, through to spring, when we have the best chance of making a photographic record of this object. And some people have wondered, you know, you always click in like, oh, are we seeing the real thing, or is this a diver's joke or something? Probably not, but we won't know until we actually get down and eyeball it and photographic evidence. And I'm really sure we're going to be able to do that when springtime comes. Well, that's not what I intended to talk about at all. I don't want to take up anybody else's time, but it's very exciting, and I can't prove it now, but it's there. And we'll wrap this up on this as far as Rock Lake, and I guess I can segue this into what I'm talking about a little bit. Rock Lake is an incredibly important place because we believe that this is the waters are covering a necropolis, which is the city of the dead. And it's a city of the dead of a people who were not related to the local Indians. And the local Indians will tell you that. These are a different people. These were the ancient copper miners who removed more than 500 million pounds of the world's highest grade copper from the upper peninsula of Michigan 5,000 years ago and shipped that copper over to Europe to create the Bronze Age. These are the copper miners. They were buried at this sacred place. Now, not all of them, but a lot of them were. Why do we know that? Because when the first archaeologists investigated Rock Lake about 1915, they found thousands of burial mounds around the lake, as well as under. And in some of those burial mounds were excavated the human remains of copper miners. And they know that because they were buried with copper mining tools from upper Michigan. Rock Lake is right below the hard snow line. Go north of that, you've got really severe winters. Just below, the winters are not that bad. So this was a place where they wintered, where the copper miners wintered. And that's why this place is so significant. Now, people have asked me sometimes, is there any UFO connection, flying saucer connection with Rock Lake? And I used to always say no. However, I have to eat my words on that because I have since learned that there have been some interesting sightings at Rock Lake, and a place associated with Rock Lake even more interesting called Sinisippi. The sightings at Rock Lake have been where these craft supposedly have hovered over the lake briefly and then moved on at high speed. This sort of sighting takes place all around the world. There's a place related, though, to Rock Lake called Sinisippi. It's a very small town. And it's significant because there was a very unique earthwork that was found at Sinisippi. It was referred to as the Sinisippi Cross. It looked like a giant compass cross. It was enormous. It was something like 800 feet. Each arm was about 400 feet long. It was perfectly surveyed. Could barely make it out from the ground. Unfortunately, it was plowed out of existence by the farmers right in front of the archaeologists as they were surveying. Not archaeologists, they were surveyors as it was surveyed. So we know exactly where it was and what it looked like. The Sinisippi Cross is interesting because it's absolutely unique. There's never been found an earthwork like this found anywhere in probably the world. People have always wondered, well, what was associated with that? Aerials? Didn't seem like it at all. Until we discovered that the Sinisippi Cross was placed exactly halfway between the copper mines that I talked about in Michigan and St. Louis, Missouri. Now, St. Louis, Missouri was also the site for a major ancient city called Cahokia. And Cahokia was also involved in the copper trade much later. But the Sinisippi Cross, interestingly, was exactly halfway between these 2 points. So possibly it was used as a marker or a ceremonial place of some kind by the copper miners. The reason I mention the Sinisippi Cross is because the Sinisippi Cross has not existed since about 1910. I think that's about when it was surveyed. And yet, there have been reports, occasionally, not frequently, of UFOs hovering directly above where the Sinisippi Cross was. What the connection between that, these sightings, and this vanished earthwork, which no longer exists, if you go there today, you'll see a bronze plaque that will explain the Sinisippi Cross. But there's nothing to see. And yet, is there some kind of memory going on here? And if so, why? What's involved with that? That also, there have been questions raised about this ancient copper mining enterprise. Was the copper used exclusively to produce the Bronze Age in Europe by combining it with zinc and tin? Or was it also used for some electrical components that maybe somebody needed at one time? That fits in with what I'm going to be addressing about this afternoon. As you probably have heard, there are certain places in the world where there have been constellations or congregations of multiple sightings of UFOs. You may have heard of a place called Gulf Breeze, Florida. Then, of course, there's the Phoenix Lights. There are places like this around the world where there are large numbers of sightings in a specific region. People have always wondered, well, why is that? Well, one of the most interesting places like this, geographically, a geographic association with multiple sightings, is in the state of Wisconsin. And it's a place that exists in the northwestern part of our state. It extends through a kind of a corridor or band, north to south, 75 miles long, approximately. And it includes mostly just small towns and farmer areas. The only town, to give you an idea where it is, this corridor cuts right through a town called Menominee, which is on I-94. For those of you who don't know where Menominee is west, not very far, from Eau Claire. So that's that area that we're talking about. Eau Claire is the largest city there. It's about 2 hours drive east of the Twin Cities. Now this area is particularly interesting, not only for the multiple UFO sightings that have taken place there, but the multiple sightings by individuals. This place, I think, is unique in two regards. It's unique because not only have so many people seen UFOs, credible witnesses, but that these witnesses have had themselves multiple sightings. But it is unique for something even more dramatic than that, and that is, so far as I know, I may be wrong, that this area in Wisconsin is the only place that's associated with a human death, someone that was actually killed by an association with a UFO, a police officer. The story of this area is ongoing today, and it begins, if I refer to my notes, is because I want to make sure that I've got this straight. I've done as much research on this as I can. The reason I became interested in it is because I was personally drawn into it. I had heard nothing about this area until I literally blundered into it some years ago. The first sighting was made on March 2nd, 1975, the first known sighting. It was made by a woman by the name of Carol Foster. Carol Foster was driving with her 3 children in the car on that day, on March 2nd, 1975, when they began, and this is somewhat similar to the Barney and Betty Hill story in a way. It was in the early evening, it was on a weekday, and they noticed what they thought at first was a bright star. And the star kept getting brighter. Then the color changed to a bright red. This so-called star then became so large that it appeared to be a great sphere, a large sphere. They could not tell how large because it was very bright, it was difficult to look at. And it began paralleling the cars that's driving on the road, going over the tops of trees and so on. It was very close. The children were panicked. Mrs. Foster was extremely alarmed. She pulled into a farm to seek some refuge from this thing because it just kept going along with them for quite some time. And then she was afraid that they would think she's crazy, even though this thing was there. She was not in her right mind, so she pulled out of the farmer's area. And as she resumed her drive down the road, this object then went faster than her car and landed right in front of her car, tried to stop her car. It didn't actually land, she says. By that time she could get a good look at it. It was at least as large as her own car. It hovered very low over the ground and was right in front of her, like it was trying to stop her car. She threw the car into reverse as long as she could, turned around and went to a friend's house whose name was Wyatt, Dave Wyatt. This thing is still trailing their car close, like about 15 or 20 feet away from their car, always on the right side. She goes to Dave Wyer's residence. The thing is still there. They get out of the car. They bang on the door. They get in. Dave Wyer comes out of it. He eyeballs this thing. His wife eyeballs it. They watch it. The object went right over the roof of the car for a brief period of time, and then took off at an unbelievable speed. No acceleration. Just vanished away. Now, apparently, Mrs. Foster was someone who had some connections not only in her town of Elmwood, and this is where all these sightings really concentrated, in Elmwood, Wisconsin. She was highly respected. She was noted for being, I believe she's passed on now, she was noted for being a woman, a very outspoken woman, didn't care what other people's opinions were, and was highly respected, being a very forthright person. So she came out and she shared this event with her friends, and her friends said, well, if you have courage to say this, then we'll tell you our experiences too. And other people began coming up with more and more of their experiences all around this little town of Elmwood, Wisconsin. The sightings that took place after that became incredibly numerous. They were of a great variety of sightings. Some of them were these luminous balls, like ball lightning, some people thought. Others were the typical saucer shape, the silvery discs. Some were huge, some were small, had different lights. They were seen by literally hundreds of people. The sighting that really began to change this was, if I get the date again for this right, was in 1975 also. Her sighting was March 2nd, 1975. All through summer, these sightings increased. Then it was in the fall, I don't have the exact date, the fall of 1975, that a highly respected officer with the Elmwood Police Department, whose name was George Wheeler. He was a veteran police officer, and at that time he said he saw what he thought was an airline disaster in the making. This was in fall of 1975, have I got that correct? Yes, fall of 1975. He said he saw a bright red flame, in his words, the size of a football field, flying through the sky, falling through the sky. He got on the horn to notify his office that, be prepared, there's a major airline disaster, when the thing stopped, just stopped in midair. He did not make any transmission. He watched this thing. It then slowly came down. He said it was still immense. It looked like the whole, like a big amorphous blob was on fire, just enormously huge, bright red flames. Other people in the area saw it. He went to investigate because it was like slowly descending. He went to where he thought he was going to see this thing descend. It then took off at an incredible rate of speed and absolutely disappeared. Now the story of this man is particularly interesting because on the evening after 11 o'clock on April 22nd, 1976, about 6 months later after this first sighting of his. This is typical, by the way. Again, people had multiple sightings in the Elmwood area. On the evening after 11 o'clock, April 22nd, 1976, a citizen of the town of Elmwood, his name was, and is, David Moots. He still exists. I spoke to him on the phone. David Moots was walking across the center of town, and he saw this patrol car just sitting in the middle of the square. All its lights were off. It was just sitting there. So he went over and he recognized, he knew the officer, which was George Wheeler, and the officer was comatose. He's sitting behind the wheel. He was conscious but barely conscious. Mr. Moots then went to the police immediately. The police came. They took him in an ambulance and took him away. And he recovered. He was fine. Officer Wheeler had no health issues, no serious health issues his whole life. He was up there in years a little bit. I believe he was 53 or 54. He was on the verge of being retired. And what he claims happened was that before 11 p.m. on the 22nd of April 1976, he investigated what appeared to be a silvery object coming right over the center of Elmwood, the city area, the civic area. He approached it. He says he was maybe about 250 feet away. The object looked like it was about 100 feet long. It was pretty good size. He described it as two rather large dinner plates together, seamlessly put together, and on top was a kind of a red dome. It was maybe 75 feet in the air, moving very slowly, and it was trailing he said either a tube, a black tube, or some kind of a, maybe we could turn that off. A black tube, or some kind of a hose, it appeared to be. It was rather lengthy, just trailing it, very short. I should mention that before he saw this object, his radio began to go out. It was still functioning, but had a lot of static that he'd never noticed before. This is the same Officer Wheeler who saw this great football-sized field of flame going through the sky 6 months before. Nothing came of that. As he approaches this object, he saw very clearly that it had multiple lights, bluish lights. It had what appeared to be black windows, dark windows, but he said you could barely make out figures walking behind it. Couldn't see clearly what they were, but they looked like figures walking behind this. The center area contained what looked like he described as rotors, not propellers, like louvers of some kind in the center. You could see it very clearly because all the city lights were on it, and it was there. As he approached it, he got within about 150 feet. He said he slowly went up on it, when a red ray appeared from this object and hit him in the chest. Went straight through the windshield and hit him in the chest, and he passed out. That is his story. Now, shortly after that, he was examined. There was no problems with him at all. Shortly after that, he developed a severe respiratory problems, which he had never had before in his life. He had to resign from the police department. 5 months later, he died. And he kept saying that I'm dying because of this red ray that struck me on the 22nd of April. Well, most people did not believe him. That this was too much to believe. Although there were a lot of people who had seen things that thought it was credible. Now, what's interesting is that when Officer George Wheeler passed away, about 5 months later, the autopsy on him concluded that the causes of his death were unknown. And you can get a copy of the autopsy. All this is easy to obtain, by the way. You can get a copy of his death certificate and his autopsy. A cause unknown. So far as I know, and perhaps Stan Friedman can correct me on this is the only incidence where there's been a human death involved in a UFO encounter. Now this sparked now even more sightings in the Elmwood area and throughout the entire farming region until, like a natural sighting, and it was, but it wasn't at the same time. We were driving on Highway 25, which goes right up to Ridgeland. It was at nighttime. And I guess it was, I don't remember the exact time of the year, I think it was early summer, late spring, 1998, something like that. We were not married just yet. I heard a sizzling noise outside. The windows were down. I heard a sizzling noise out towards the right, in the air. I looked out, Laura sitting next to me, I looked out the window. I swear to God, it was like a meteor that had not yet caught fire. It was a stone. It was a pitted, it looked like a moon, and it was spinning rapidly. It was rapidly spinning and sizzling, and then as I'm watching it, it caught fire. The sound was carried on the breeze of the wind, and it would go on for a long time, this deep grinding going on. And she said, well, what's that? And this is late at night, in the middle of winter, hard winter, this grinding going on, and then it would vanish away. She said, what's that? I said, I've never heard that before. And this went on for months. Several times a week we'd hear this grinding. So I figured, we're going to find out what this is. There's got to be something. So we went out in the car, looking for where we thought this sound might have come from, scoured the whole area. Nothing that would resemble it. It sounded like a major industrial grinding going on, like some big drill somewhere. Nothing. Abandoned farms, underpopulated. I know that area real well because before I married Laura, I used to ride my bike all over there. I used to ride for miles all over there. Nothing would resemble that at all. This deep grinding going on. So after all these things have been going on, I'd only been now, I moved into Ridgeland in 1996. We stayed there until 2000. And you see these incidents happening. I didn't discuss them with anybody. And then one day, Adam Piffner, who was the son of our landlord, the guy we rented the cabin from, he was over and we were just chatting about this and that. And he looked at me rather strangely and he said, you guys ever seen anything strange out here? So then, of course, Laura right away says, oh, Frank's seen a UFO. You know, I'll say that, you know. But he says, yeah, he says, that makes sense. He says, people all through this area, this is Ridgeland now, this would be like on the northern end of this corridor. He says, farmers and says students, we've seen stuff for years all over here. And I asked if you've seen anything. So I said, well, what have you seen? He says, we've seen plenty of stuff. He used to live in that same cabin. He grew up there, as a matter of fact, as a kid. He was a college student then. And I said, what was the best sighting you ever had? He says, oh, the best sighting was really great. He says, my whole family saw it. He says, we all had multiple sightings, but this was the best one. He says, he, his brother, his dad were in the garage, which is just across the way. His mom was in the house. She starts banging on the window and pointing up, this guy. They get out of the garage and they look up, and right over the garage, he says no more than 10 or 12 feet, is this really bizarre looking craft. He says it was a cross between a helicopter body, a banana, and a giant grasshopper. Very weird looking thing. Had no windows, no rivets, nothing, no propellers. It was nailed in the sky. It was right over the garage. It wasn't very big. Looked like it was maybe about 12 feet long. And it was at an angle. And it was like it had been mounted in midair. And so everybody's looking at that. And his brother said, well, there's another one. But it was like none they'd ever seen. And then after they're watching it for maybe a minute or two, again, just takes off. These are not aerodynamic vehicles. They don't have wings or propellers, and scientifically or just naturally, it's impossible for them to be noiseless, and yet they are. So what are we to conclude from all this? It's very difficult to conclude. I don't mean theories. One thing, though, does strike home. Whatever these occupants of these things may be, they probably have needs. That seems to be a general common denominator everywhere. And one of their needs fits in with that area. Why do they constellate in this? Why are they in Ridgeland? And why are they in Elmwood? And why are they in this corridor? Why do they keep coming back there? What's there all the time? Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that's there is a large concentration of incredibly pure water. It's all limestone through there. And the water deposits in Ridgeland are some of the finest you'll find anywhere. It's beautiful, sweet water. Now, what I think of is that grinding. And it sounded like somebody was grinding through that limestone. And the other thing was that sighting that was made by Officer Wheeler way back in 1976, was it? Where he said he saw the object that was hovering over by City Hall in Elmwood with a big tube hanging underneath. Something like a black hose. Is that for sucking up water? I don't know. That's just a supposition. But I do know that these things are real, they're authentic. I do not believe they're associated with the military, if only because, all right, so let's say the flying triangle, for example, that's seen. Some people claim this is a great military thing. Well, it's been seen for so long, something of its secret nature would have leaked out by now. And I was telling Stanton Friedman something kind of interesting. I'm going to wrap this up now because it's gone too long as it is. I was doing some research for this book that's going to be coming out next year on the Anasazi Indians. And as I was researching it, I found out about a people that they were neighbors to called the Hohokam. The great people. Did tremendous work of irrigation 1,000 years ago. They were neighbors and friends of the Anasazi. And a lot of Hohokam pottery still exists. They vanished. They vanished in the worst way. They were exterminated by their neighbors, but that's another story. But on the pottery, they left an interesting design. The descendants of the Hohokam today, partial descendants, are the Pima Indians in Arizona. They know that through genetics and through their cultural affinities that the Pima Indians are at least partially related to this vanished people called the Hohokam. And Pima pottery has a very interesting design. I found this out in a book by Emil Haury. Emil Haury was the straight doyen of Native American studies in the Southwest. He wrote in the 1950s and 60s. This book came out in 1970. He wrote the book 68 or something like that, 68, 69. And it's a big, thick, academic book that lists all the pottery types, and it's very dry reading. But interestingly enough, he mentions in passing that the Pima Indians, who are the descendants of the Hohokam, have an interesting glyph, which they refer to as the flying triangle, which is this great delta shape that flies over the sky. And that not only do the Pima have this, but this is the same symbol that's found on Hohokam pottery that goes back 1,000 years ago, the flying triangle. And Haury says we don't know what this meant to them, but it was some great triangle that flew through the sky. Military invention? I don't think so. We've been visited for a long time. That's all I really wanted to share with you, except to say that there are areas apparently in the earth that attract these guests or visitors, however you want to put it, although they don't certainly behave like very well-mannered visitors, and that we, in a way, are blessed or cursed, apparently how you look at it, in Wisconsin, with having our own area that resonates with their activity. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them for you. No? Well, thank you very much for listening.